I'm glad to make it. Hello, everybody.
Good morning,
Hello.
America.
It's good to see some people I haven't seen in a while.
So our participants are
trying to look at the shirt to see if you had a sign on there.
Just echo. I probably should. I got an NAACP shirt here somewhere. I probably should grab it.
I added it to your bio, so don't worry. I got you. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're just going to let people roll in for a couple of more minutes, and then we'll start. I just want to thank everybody again. I know it's an evening. It's a Wednesday night, so I appreciate you coming in at 7 o'clock. So I will give it just another minute and a half, and we'll start. We'll roll into welcoming everybody and starting introducing everybody. Okay, so welcome everybody to the third annual Policy, Politics, and Donor Summit, hosted by the Black Women's PAC, our political action committee in the state of Texas. We want to draw your attention today to redistricting and the zip code 76104 in Fort Worth that has the lowest life expectancy in the state, which is 66.7, which is 12 years lower than the national average. The Black Women's PAC is now celebrating, I guess, its third year, and we are very much focused on educating voters, supporting candidates, and moving the needle for Black Texas voters. None of this would be possible without the help of the Texas Coalition of Black Democrats, Next Wave Strategies, and also Woven Strategies. So thank you very much for your assistance in this. Today we have joining us Kendall Locke, Kendall is our technical guide today, and he is a senior at University of North Texas, will be graduating next year. So congratulations, Kendall. And he's graduating, I think, 2 years early or something like that. Kendall's, really brilliant, and one of the future leaders that we should look forward to seeing doing great things here in the state of Texas. We are joined today with attorney Gary Bledsoe. Gary Bledsoe right here is president of the Texas NAACP. He has held that position since 1991. He also serves as, are you still a dean at the?
No, I was acting dean. I still am at Texas Southern, but not as acting dean.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we'll skip that part. He is an Austin attorney who specializes in public interest law, employment, and civil rights law. He is also the state nationally recognized for his participation and knowledge on redistricting. So thank you very much for joining us today. Next, we have Giannis Banks. Yes, thank you. We have Giannis Banks, and Giannis has, with the NAACP, has done extensive research and presentations on redistricting. He is known in the NAACP world as the guru, and everybody sings his praises for how he, just took the initiative to learn more about redistricting, and then became, a specialty. It became a specialty of his. Currently, he is in Austin, serving as the community engagement coordinator with Capital Metro. So thank you very much, Giannis, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And last, but definitely not least, we have the beautifully poised and highly accredited public servant, Miss Lorraine Miller. Ms. Miller is serving as chair of the Fort Worth Redistricting Task Force. She is the first African-American and the 35th clerk of the United States House of Representatives. In addition, she served as interim president and CEO of the National NAACP. And she currently sits as co-chair for the Credentials Committee with the Democratic National Committee. So thank you very much for joining us today. So I just want to get started. I'm going to turn it over to Gary Bledsoe, who is going to really do a small presentation on redistricting and just give us an idea of the history of it and what we can expect in the next session. We're going to look to Giannis to keep this conversation to its conversational level so that we can, everybody can understand, because we do want the issue of redistricting to be recognized by voters, and we want it to make it as easy and as comprehensive as possible so that we understand when we're voting for state reps and city council and mayor and all of the elected positions, how redistricting, and Congress, how redistricting plays a role in that. So Mr. Bledsoe, please go right ahead.
Thank you guys for inviting me, and I want to take my hat off to the Black Women's PAC and to African-American females in general, because you've really been the leaders politically in this nation in terms of truth and justice. I'm glad of the great role that African-American men have played, but African-American females have really led the way, and they continue to lead the way. And again, your focus on the health and individuals within your community is the kind of thing one would expect from such great individuals. I want to move through the presentation fairly quickly so we can get into a discussion. I think you'll find out there's not a better map drawer around than Giannis Banks. He's learned this stuff so well. And Lorraine goes without speaking in terms of being a real icon and somebody who has really been made us all proud here in Texas with the things she's accomplished. So I'm always proud to be associated on a program with her. First of all, let me just say with redistricting, I don't know what the level of understanding that everyone has, but typically what happens with redistricting is when there is a new census, it's mandated that the states of our country go and redistrict in terms of the United States Congress, so that we can determine how much representation we'll see from each state. And so we'll look at the actual growth. We'll see which states have the greatest population. And then when we see which states have the greatest population, there have been some that are moved up percentage-wise and some down. We may see an adjustment in the number of individuals who represent that state in the United States Congress. So for example, in Texas, we moved from having 32 in 2010 to having 36 in 2011. And so we are looking this time to increase to 38 or potentially 39. But with Texas, there had been a bit of an undercount. So I don't know exactly how that is going to play out in terms of the real undercount with the United States Census. The one additional point I want to make in reference to this first slide that you see is that there is something called mid-decade redistricting. It was always thought that redistricting would take place immediately after the end of the decade, when the census numbers would come in and be provided to the states. But what Texas did when Tom DeLay was a major player in the United States Congress, and they took over the leadership in the state Texas State House of Representatives, they decided to do mid-decade redistricting, and they did that in the 2003 to 2006 realm. And so we actually had mid-decade redistricting. Now in Texas, we've always had a history of discriminating against African Americans and Latinos in redistricting. Since 1965, when we had the Voting Rights Act to actually be adopted and go into effect, in every single round of redistricting since that time, Texas has been found to have discriminated against African Americans and or Latinos. So in the 1970 round, the 80 round, the 90 round, at first it was the Democratic Party. Then a lot of the discriminators moved to the Republican Party. And so it's been the Republican Party in the last session in the last two rounds of redistricting that discriminated against African Americans. That's something even Democratic officials testified to in the litigation. So we have to understand that redistricting is when you determine who has seats and who does not have seats. And so it was not until 1971 in Texas with the White v. Register case that we ended up getting significant representation in the Texas State House of Representatives. Prior to that time, we had a representative from Dallas and a couple from Houston, and that was a complete total of it. It was that 1971 litigation that led to Austin, more in Dallas, Fort Worth, and San Antonio actually getting representation. And since that time, Beaumont. If we go to slide 2, slide 2 just talks about, I wanted to let everyone know here, redistricting is not just limited to the United States Congress. It goes up and down the board. So whether you're looking at a water utility district that has single member districts, if you're looking at a school board, you're looking at trustees, you're looking at city councils, county commissioners, everyone would be going through redistricting at this time. And so that's a real cautionary note, because what I remember when I was a young person back in the 60s, we had no African American representation on many governing bodies, et cetera. And so it was always a big deal after that, when in 1970 whatever, that we actually had an African American elected to a city council or a school board. So I think to many that may seem like it's foreign, but that's how things used to be. And we have to understand that we have to take note of history to make sure we do everything that we can to make sure that we don't turn back to go in that direction. So that will become the rule again today. So we have to look up and down wherever we have a single member district. We have to beware, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, but I'll leave that point where it is. Now, so redistricting is what? That's when you decide what boundaries that there are for your city council, for your county commissioners court. And there's a limit on the boundaries. They're limited by population variation. The United States Supreme Court has laid out various rules that apply to variations at different levels. So for example, if you're at a level of a state house seat or a local commissioner seat or what have you, you can have a variation of maybe about 10% population differences in some of the districts. But when you go to the United States Congress, the variation is supposed to be almost exact, less than 1% is what the rule is. So they've said that when it comes to the United States Congress, there's almost exactitude that's required in terms of the numbers. And why is that important? Because depending on how many people you might put in a district, it can influence who can or who may or may not win a seat from that particular district. So the person that has the power of the pen, that can sit there with a map like Giannis does and decide who goes in and who goes out, can have enormous power. You know, sadly, like in the last round of redistricting, our expert, Dr. Richard Murray, testified that the Texas legislature's gerrymander in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex was the most egregious racial gerrymander in the United States of America in the 2010 round of redistricting. And Dr. Murray is really a very knowledgeable person. So when he says that, that's really quite serious. So slide 3 is about how to sometimes they make it unfair. Well, you may try to take all African Americans and put them all in one district so they'd have no influence elsewhere. Or you might want to do like they did with the way they did the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex in that legislative round that I just described. What Dr. Murray said about it. What they did is they went in and cut little slivers of the Black and brown community and added them into elongated districts that extended out, whether it's to West Texas or to East Texas. So you can make sure that Black folk in Tarrant County, Black folk in Dallas County were limited in what they could do in terms of whether or not they could actually control the district. They tried to take every Black or brown person they could and put it in Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson's district. That district was about 90% Black or brown. You know, what Giannis might recall, we did a color shading presentation during the litigation, and you can do a color shading that shows different colors depending on the percentage of African Americans in the district, or even within a location in the district. And so, we color shaded Congresswoman Johnson's district to all the areas that were 90% or greater. And you had one little dot in the middle that was like a speck that did not have 90%. So, you know, you can see the kind of things that people can do. They pack, they crack, they do what they can now. But let me say this, and we all need to keep this in the backs of our minds. That happened this last time, and I think they weren't aware that when you squirrel away and try to hide minority voters that you don't think will vote, that sometimes those voters may erupt in another district. You saw All Red end up winning a district surprisingly up in the Metroplex, and you saw Fletcher in the Houston area surprisingly winning a district that was supposed to be a safe Republican district. So, you know, that there's a real danger when folks try to do that and to squirrel away minority voters. One of the issues coming up, I'll discuss it more later, they can use inappropriate databases, and they can simply just configure districts to dilute the minority vote. And so whether it's just cracking or packing, it goes even further than that, because you can even determine on the number of maps. Like one of the issues that is being discussed at the legislature, which is a frightening issue to me, is there's a lot of fright that was caused in this state when the African American females, known as the Houston 19, won their race back in 2018, and we've heard about the Black Girl Magic. And so now they're talking about quartering the state, where the courts of appeals might be elected from quarters of the state. And what that does is that dilutes the ability of minorities to have an influence in the election of powerful individuals. And as you know, in the urban areas where there's a lot of commerce and major business, there's a lot of power that we can yield in those areas with the way things are configured now and the way things are developing. Let me say this in terms of we hope this time, we tried to get it last time. We hope to really solidify the VZ district and also to have a Latino district created there in the Fort Worth area, because we think that this helps in terms of the partnerships between African Americans and Latinos. And there's some other things relating to that issue that I will talk about a little bit later, but I'll hurry up and get through here. The undercount of minority numbers is another way to make it unfair, where you claim people aren't there who are really there. And so that's another way that you can use to make the districts unfair. What is precedent? The next slide. What does precedent say about when we are entitled to a district? That's one of the problems in the law. Now, let me start this part of the conversation by saying that what Dr. Murray said, and on cross-examination, I got the state's expert to come very close to this. Dr. Murray said there wasn't a district in the state that African Americans did not have, where they had 30% or more, where we didn't win it if we wanted it. If we wanted it and we put a candidate out there, we win. But the rule is we're not entitled to get one unless we can show 50.1% of the adult voting age population as just one of the requirements that we have to show. So you got to have that numerosity requirement. So we show up with 45%, 43%, 42%. That's not going to do it in terms of creating a new district. We have to also show that the white voters vote differently, and that you have that you have polarized voting in the community, and you have to show that that minorities in the district you want to draw actually vote. So if you got minorities that don't vote, just the numbers, that's not going to do it. So what you have to do is start looking at races where if people had been in that district together, if they had been, it's hypothetical, whether or not they would have won. And so you end up doing that and trying to choose races that make it clear to the court whether or not someone may have won. There's another way to create districts, but one of the things, and I haven't really figured out how to bring it or how to litigate it well. I'm hoping to this time. But you know, there's with white districts, they get justified by the Supreme Court many times by saying these are naturally occurring districts. So if it's a black district or a brown district, it's got to be a 50.1% district that's created under the Voting Rights Act. But for a white district, it can be a naturally occurring district. Well, I think the Constitution should apply to us as well, but that is going to be more of a complicated matter. And maybe that's just me not being one of the voting rights lawyers who does this for a living. But I've always thought that just when you read the cases and you read the justifications the Supreme Court gives, that's something we might want to look at. One of the things that we might want to look at, and you should be particularly on the alert for there in Tarrant County, and is there's the issue of if we want to create more districts because of the numbers of African Americans and Latinos and where they live, it's really hard outside of South Texas to get a Latino district that's 50.1% citizen voting age population that could prevail and win when you go through the Jingles test. And African Americans, you can't get 50.1% either because of the housing patterns. People live together. So it's important that we be able to show that African Americans and Latinos should be considered as one for purposes of creating a district under the Voting Rights Act. We tried this last time. We won it one round. We lost it the last round, but the court was very complimentary to the case we put on and said we were really close. We may want to try it again. Now, we kind of won it in Killeen, but got overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court. But the idea that sadly, there was another civil rights organization, a Latino civil rights organization, that took the opposite position, and along with the state, and they put on evidence that blacks and browns were political enemies, and that was not a good thing. That was a pretty bad thing, and they ended up prevailing on one district in front of the United States Supreme Court, House District 90 in Dallas, because of some incredible things that I was surprised that the Democratic state rep there had done in reference to Latino voters. Next slide, problems presented by the courts. Let me just go through this very quickly. We know we have a new Supreme Court. It's going to be really hard for us to even think about winning a case. Believe it or not, when people talked about our Chief Justice being a potential fifth vote of the swing vote, he's never decided on our side in a race case that's divided, and he doesn't go with us in redistricting. So that was never even a starter with me. I never thought we'd get Justice Roberts. Ironically, the only one who has done this before is Clarence Thomas. Not that he does it much, but he was going to be the only shot at a fifth vote from the way I looked at it. So now with it being 6-3, I don't really see that we have much of a chance going to the United States Supreme Court. You know, they overturned a victory that we had in front of 2 Republican judges and 1 Democratic judge when there was really no evidence to overturn us. So, and that was under the previous court when Ruth Bader Ginsburg was still on the court. The federal circuit courts have been changed. We saw the changes even this last time in reference to the litigation in reference to the election. The Fifth Circuit has gotten really, really conservative, and the way they make selections of maybe who handles cases or even their panels seems to be really kind of problematic. So I don't know that provides a great avenue. So with the federal district courts now a lot more conservative, the federal circuit courts, those all make it very difficult. So, you know, politics are going to be really important this time. Texas appellate courts, you know, there's some courts where one could win some of these cases with, but the Texas Supreme Court has shown that because of the politicization of the courts, that they don't have the latitude to make the appropriate decision in these types of cases. So that's not really an option either. So we really are kind of locked in with that, but we have to go forward with the litigation and do the best we can and win all that we can. Now, 3 quick cases I want to mention. The RUCO case, I mentioned that case because the extent of the gerrymandering in North Carolina was so extreme that the Supreme Court allowed, where you had basically even voters that voted for all the congressional candidates on the Republican side, that voted on for candidates on the Democratic side, but they got 10 of the 13 seats went to Republicans, even though you had basically a 50-50 vote. So that showed an extreme gerrymander, and that was approved by the Supreme Court. That's really a bothersome opinion. Evanwell is a thing where you can choose what database, and then Shelby County, of course, is the one we no longer have a Section 5. Last thing is what you can do: make a record on important issues before appropriate bodies that are deliberating to change districts. Tender alternative maps when you can. You need to have a Giannis or have Giannis do a training session. Identify community-minded lawyers who desire to get trained so they can help, because without a Section 5, we need more lawyers. Those great organizations like LDF and Lawyers Committee can't handle all the cases. Identify community-minded experts, people who may be, whether it's at a local college, a community college, or what have you. I know one of the best experts I've seen is one of the MALDEF experts who works at a community college in Austin, but his historical expertise on Latinos is really incredible, and he has great expertise on African Americans as well. The next thing is, that whenever you try to prevail in these cases, there's something called the Senate factors or the Arlington Heights factors, and so you usually get expertise there, but individuals can help with by keeping information about individuals who might have been subjected to discrimination, articles about it, any research that's been done in the community, and so all those types of names and pertinent information can be shared with an expert and can lead to a significant report. But the other thing is to make sure that you oppose discriminatory maps, that you make a record of it, that you go to the body and you say, and maybe turn the community out and say that we actually oppose this map. So those are some things that we all can do. So with that, thank you guys so much. Look forward to having a continued conversation.
Okay, so Mr. Bliss, so we do have a question in the chat from Carol West, and it's: the Texas Constitution calls for redistricting at the first regular session after the census. The census may not get here until the end of the next session. Does that mean redistricting won't occur until 2023?
Well, what has been projected in talking to individuals over at the legislature and in federal government, it's contemplated that the census numbers will be received by the state around the 1st of April. And so there is a plan now to actually have the legislature deliberate and consider the plans. But because there's so many plans that will be needing to be drawn, it's very likely that either a special session or the legislative redistricting board will have to make that decision. There's a difference of legal opinion and thought about whether or not there can be a special session for the purposes of redistricting. It's been done before. I think it can be done again this time, but there are other people who say no. With looking at that constitutional provision, that precludes you from having a special session until the legislative redistricting board has made its attempt. So I think it is actually going to happen, or some attempts going to happen. But I do think you can do it in the interim, though. I'm looking at the letter of the law in the Constitution. It appears that I'm probably not correct on that, but I'm just going by what I've seen in the past.
Okay. Let's see. Steph Swanson is asking with Stephanie
Tracy,
Swanson. Yes.
Before you do, I'm sorry, my mic was muted. I wanted to piggyback off of something Gary said.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Just so people would know, and I put in the chat a link to where they can go learn about the redistricting board. And this is why it's so important, because the redistricting board is made up of the lieutenant governor, speaker of the house, the attorney general, the comptroller, and the commissioner of the general land office. So it's very partisan. But the other thing, Gary, is that from my understanding and from what I've seen, they can't draw congressional districts. It still has to be done by the legislator. So there still will probably be a need to call a special session, going to your argument about whether it can be done or not. And I think if you have to call a special session for congressional districts, you might as well do it for them all, right? Because you're going to have to be there. But my understanding is that they can't draw congressional. The Constitution, Texas Constitution, only gives them the right to draw Texas House district and Texas Senate districts.
Okay. So one more question. Let's see, should we try to find, this is from Stephanie Swanson, should we try to find community leaders from the south side of Fort Worth to provide testimony at the legislature's public input hearings? And Stephanie Swanson's with the League of Women Voters, and she is the chair of their redistricting committee, if I have that title correct.
I would say
Mr.
yes.
Yes.
I mean, the easy part is yes.
What I would say in answer to that is absolutely yes. That's one of the things I was trying to encourage people to do. But I think that what Giannis will tell you and what I've seen is that they disregard what occurs. It's truly amazing. You know, we would turn out 85-90% of the people at all of the hearings, and you'd have a court right, or the state put in its brief, or representatives of senators take a witness stand and talk about how the numbers were so great supporting them. And so I don't know how you get around that, because we produce people, they show up, they say what they want to, and that's before we had this whole new genre of what we call alternative facts, right? But we do need to do that and have the record, because to the extent we end up with courts where that actually makes a difference, then we need to have people that are actually discussing. And a lot of times what happens is that when people who maybe are not intricately connected with what's going on with redistricting, they may know things that may enlighten those who are working on it. They may know some connections between different parts of a community that might be the logical point in trying to make a legal argument about why something should not have been cut out of a district, why something should have been joined to a district. So I think hearing from people who are really connected with the community, who've lived there for a long time, is really important. And you see with conservatives, you see they make a lot of changes there to accommodate conservative voters. I mean, whether it's to move a school from one district to another just because somebody wanted a school in another district. I've seen them make really small changes just because of who people were, and that's somewhat problematic. Usually it's a rep, but not always a rep that's being accommodated. And Giannis, I think you're right about that other point, but I think that's not how the legislative leadership sees it. I think they see it differently.
It's in the Constitution, though, so they kind of, I mean, that gives you your argument. The Constitution says they can only do House and Senate. So I'm not trying to do. I mean, you know more about the law than I will.
Yeah, I'm just telling you, they're saying right now that that's where they're going to send it. Yeah.
Well, Giannis, I'm going to pitch these next two questions your way, and then we can go on to just kind of your take on redistricting and how. Okay, so the two questions really helped me in my ask of you in your presentation. So it's one, are there training programs for young lawyers interested in working on redistricting litigation? And then two, what is the positive and negative for keeping the Black community together as it relates to redistricting? And if you could kind of, and I hate to ask you to recap, but kind of go through what Attorney Bledsoe said and make it relatable, because I think the word, and if we have people who are going to testify, that is a serious word in our community. I mean, that is very intense.
Mhm.
And how do we make that simple? How do we make them understand that this is not something that you are then going to be, arrested for, or
Right.
have some kind of legal obligation? Is there some
Sure.
fear? How do we overcome the fear of the word testimony, and then not even knowing what that means? What's the community program, or is there one that helps us understand that better?
Sure. And, thankfully, I have experience with actually both of those questions. I'm not a lawyer by trade at all. Maybe I should go to law school, but I had the privilege of learning under, someone who I say has a great legal mind, and he'll tell you he's not a redistricting lawyer by trade. I think he mentioned that earlier, but he's done, I think, 3 or 4 redistricting cycles, and if you include this past one, there's about 4 redistricting trials just wrapped up in this, 10-year, 8-year span. So I learned from Gary is where I learned. And not to speak out of turn, I did used to work for him with the state office, but I would promise you that more than likely he would love to have help for redistricting from young lawyers if we get to the case of going to a lawsuit. So I think reaching out to whether it's your local NAACP chapter or even directly to your state NAACP chapter and saying, I want to learn about this law process. Sitting in court, there's not many lawyers who look like us that were doing redistricting lawsuit. In the court case that I saw, it was Gary, it was Jesse. Now, we did have Robert Knotson along with us, who's Anglo, but I tell you, he will cut people faster than probably any one of us. He doesn't play with that. And Gary has stories about Robert that he will probably tell. And we had Allison Riggs, of course, as well, who was representing the NAACP as well. But when it comes to lawyers who look like us, there's not many. Especially as we're talking to Black women, there were no Black women in the court case that we were involved in. Other places, maybe. But where we were when it comes to redistricting, because it's not one of those sexy things. And traditionally, it's something that comes up, every 10 years. Of course, Texas, it took us 7 years to do that. But I can tell you that I'm sure Gary would take all the help he could get with doing the redistricting case. And he has forgotten more than I know about redistricting. And so there's just a wealth of knowledge you can get under him. I can't speak that enough about, helping out with that, because it's a very important process. And so I think that would probably be the first step to go. And, as folks are getting more engaged and more active now, I'm sure there's going to be other organizations that are probably going to dip their toes into this redistricting process. And I think part of what they may learn too, though, it's not as simple or easy as what you want it to be. And you do need lawyers who had some experience doing this, because it's not your typical law. And Gary Ring, named off a couple of court cases that you kind of got to be ready with, that you'll hear reference to a lot. But I think reaching out to Gary and even Jesse Gaines, who I know is on the call
He's
as
on the
well.
call. Yes.
I think those are 2 great resources to help, because I know Jesse will probably love some help for redistricting as well. Looking for folks who've done it. And if it can be people of color, even better. But I think hitting them up first. And the second one was about testifying, right?
Yeah. And let me ask this right quick.
Sure.
Attorney Bledsoe and Giannis, do you mind if we put your email addresses or put something in the chat,
I
so
don't
that
mind.
if there is someone interested, that they can connect with you directly?
Oh, I
That's
don't mind
fine.
at all.
That's fine with me.
Okay.
I still
Thank
get
you.
phone calls from legislators trying to get a hold of Gary, or they want to get a hold of Gary and need NAACP help. And so, that's one of the things of I will never get tired of doing.
So we have like 20 minutes left. So I just want to be mindful, everyone. I want everybody to know. And we still have Lorraine Miller to talk about the
Sure.
Fort Worth Redistricting Task Force.
I'll be
So
brief.
no pressure, Giannis, but
Well, not at all. I've learned to be brief from dealing with the legislature and testifying. Yeah, testifying, it can be scary, but it's fairly easy. I think what we want from the community, what's needed from the community, as Gary mentioned, is to tell your story. You don't have to worry about the law when you're going to testify. You don't even need to know the law when you're going to testify, especially for the redistricting committee. What they need to hear from you is what you are going through, what it's like in your community, in your area. I think as we talk Fort Worth in 2010, even with the short time frame they announced the redistricting committee hearings for a lot of the maps. I remember the Senate one very well, because there were people who came down from what was in Wendy Davis's district, which I believe is Senate District 10, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. There were quite a few people who came down but talked about her coming out into the area and engaging with people where they weren't normally engaged, where folks weren't normally coming to talk to them and telling their story. And they did ignore them during the hearing, like Gary said, but they did eventually come to a deal. And that may have played a role with them coming to a deal to hear about what it means to have candidates that actually want to come talk to you, listen to you, and having your voice heard when traditionally your voice hasn't been heard and your district has been changing a certain way. And so I think from the community, if you don't have a legal background, don't let that scare you. Come out and just tell your story. And that's for redistricting or any bill that may be going on at the legislature, but even locally for city council, for your county commission, because you're going to have county redistricting done as well, and you're going to need to talk to your county commissioners court as well. Tell your story. Tell what you've been going through. Tell why it's important to have representation in your area, why your area shouldn't be divided. I think you asked about the pitfalls of putting too many African Americans or not enough in one area. I think you heard Gary talked about some of the districts where John withdrew, where you can have that 30%. If you dilute it too much, yeah, you won't be able to elect the candidate of your choice. And there's time when folks may become overzealous, and the legislator was guilty of that as well, where they would do what's called packing. And I think one of the links may have all these different definitions you may hear, but packing is when you would put an extra amount of a certain population, we'll say a certain demographic in a district, and they'll play it off as, well, look, we're trying to create this black district, this brown district, so we made it 80% African American. And in reality, you probably just need really 50.1 to be a black district. And so you could take that extra 30% and probably put it into another district to create two, but they will play it as, well, we're trying to make sure it can be this. So we overdid it. We made it 90%, 99% black, whatever. And there's been, there's testimony and stories of you had legislators trying to push out some of their black population, some of their brown population, because their district is trending. I think, as Gary mentioned earlier, it's trending a certain way, and they want to keep hold of that district. So let's push the black folks over here, and that way I can hold on to the seat a little longer. We know Texas is changing. I think it's helpful that one of the links I had probably has some definition of words you can use. The kickoff redistricting, you have to do apportionment of the seats. And if you're not familiar with that, as you talk about, if you hear you talk about the gain we can get from congressional seats, if you're curious about how that's done, all you do is, it's very simple math, but it's not what's taught in schools. Unfortunately, we just don't talk redistricting or census or teach it in schools. We mentioned it for like a paragraph, and we tell you have to fill out your census. This has to happen. Good luck. I learned by fire. Gary has had a lot of faith in me, for better or worse, and would just send me to the wolves and say, "Go learn."
I was vindicated.
Yes, you were. And I went and learned, School of Hard Knocks, which was great though. But what you learned though is that in order to figure out your congressional districts, you take the population of your state and you divide it by 435, which is the number of congressional seats that we have. And that will tell you how many congressional seats Texas should get. So if you're curious just about how that works, and it can, work similar for any other seat. If you have a county, you got X amount of population in the county, you got 5 seats in your county, do the math. This is how many seats you should have. And, when you get decimal points, you figure it out as you go. If it's, as you can do in school, if it's 4.6, maybe you can get you a 5 county seat, maybe not. You can look, and then there's always variations and there's other rules, but in times past, and before I'll wrap this up so we can get on to Ms. Miller. I don't want to take up her time. In times past, when it comes to the legislature, they use this software called Red Apple for the legislative districts, for the state board of education districts, for the congressional districts. It's Texas proprietary software, Red Apple. It's created by the state that they use for redistricting. In the past, you can reach out to Ledge Council, which I think one of those links I posted is to Ledge Council, to their website, where you can get to where you need to go for that. But you can reach out to them, and they would do training on how to use Red Apple, so you can draw maps on your own, so you can go and have that availability. So when you do go and testify, if you wanted to get deeper into it and show them how a district will look, you can draw a district, because all the data will be automatically uploaded for you. That was pre-COVID. What happens now during COVID, I can't tell you. I know there's trying to figure out how open the Capitol will be in times past. For redistricting, the software will be in every state rep and every senator's office in Austin, but their local office would also have a copy of the software, and you can go in there and play with it.
The public can go in there.
The public could, right? You wouldn't. You just reach out to your legislator, let them know, hey, I want to come draw on Red Apple, blah blah blah. We're in COVID now. What happens now?
Mhm.
I don't know. You may not be able to go to Austin and draw there, and there's district office may not be open for that, and that's understandable because we have these safety protocols we got to go by. But
Giannis, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
My name is Tracy Scott.
Yes,
Why
ma'am.
should I care about redistricting?
Redistricting.
What does it do for me? Why should I care? What is
It's so
why should I
important. I
care?
think it helps or try to fix a lot of the problems that we have, a lot of issues that we have. There's funding involved in redistricting. You look
What
at
kind of funding?
Well, when we tie in the census, you have what's going to go for schools funding, your road funding, what can go for different facilities or infrastructure you need in your community. That's comes from the census. That ties into redistricting. When Gary talks about having a black district, a brown district, a minority opportunity district, and what your representation looks like, whether your voice will be fully heard, maybe partially heard, or not even heard at all. This is where all that is done. We ignored this for so long because that's what's been done. I think part of the training I got, they talked about Mississippi, where this, state of Mississippi, if I remember correctly, they had a high black population. But as we talk about packing districts, they drew 2, 3, 4 districts for the state of Mississippi, and like, look, black folks, we're giving you some seats here in the Mississippi House, right? But they should have had more than what they was given. It took black folks, NAACP, other organizations to realize, are we being shortchanged? They sold us wolf tickets of, yes, we have 3 seats, but we should have a lot more. And that's what comes from that, is how your voice can be elevated, whether it's congressional. But as Gary laid out, there's city council if you got single member districts, there's school board, there's water boards, if you have to have a district to be drawn, it has to be redrawn. Now, unfortunately, we don't have Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act anymore to protect us. And so we have to go through Section 2. And Section 2 is more reactive, and where before we can be proactive. And that's a whole nother conversation, but maybe that changes.
We're going to move on.
Yeah, see, you got me going.
Thank
asked
you.
that question.
I know, I see.
I hang out with Gary too much.
I know, and I thank you, and I appreciate it so much, because I do know, this is seriously important, and it does trickle down. And I want to, get to, now we can talk about it locally, and how, with the Fort Worth Redistricting Task Force is working on now. And I'm also a member. So thank you, Chairman Miller. And we can talk about, just locally what's happening, and, what does that look like, here in Fort Worth. But I do want to revisit, Giannis, and I do want to, at some other time, really dive down and have a conversation about why should we care? Why is this important? And what funding and what does that look like? So thank you. So yes. Okay. Hello, Chairman Miller.
Morning, Tracy. And good evening, everyone. And thanks to the Black Women's PAC for asking me to join you this evening. It's been a really interesting conversation, and I look at it from a couple of perspectives. We're based on 76104 zip code. I live in 76104 zip code. Born in that zip code, own a home there for more than 45 years. So this is a community that I am very familiar with. When I came back to Fort Worth a few years ago, my friends were saying, "Girl, you don't want to live over there. Why don't you come on out here? We've got, gated communities and you can live in there." And I thought, how could I be an advocate for a neighborhood and I live someplace else? So I chose to continue my residency. So with that, I was asked to chair our redistricting committee for the city of Fort Worth. And you asked the question, Tracy, why should I care? Well, 76104 should care about redistricting more than anybody in the city because of the systemic problems. I can't say systemic really well, but anyway, because of some ongoing problems that we have in that neighborhood that are not going to change unless we have the kind of leadership that are These folks are advocates for us, not just 76104, but I firmly believe as the chair of the redistricting task force for the city of Fort Worth, we have to do redistrict in a way where people get quality representation. So we're adding 2 new seats to the Fort Worth City Council, 2. And so the question becomes, who gets representation? We get 2, but who? Not the representatives necessarily, the people that will run for council, but who in the neighborhoods get represented. Yanis mentioned that it's the public, the transportation, why it's important. A block from my house, you can catch the local bus. Without the right kind of redistricting, and which will produce the right kind of person that will make sure that transit is available and accessible in the neighborhood, you can't walk to the block and get on the bus. And then you've got to make sure the bus is going where you need to go. So these are just practical things that people, I think is something when she was leader Pelosi would say, you gotta connect the dots. And we've got to do a better job of connecting the dots with the public so they understand why this is important. And so one of the things that we hope to accomplish, Tracy, is as members of this redistricting task force, do a couple of things. We want to educate people. This is the first time in our redistricting efforts in Fort Worth that we are having a seminar, and we're calling it Redistricting 101 for the average, everyday person that that's interested in this. And then we're trying to have, because we're in the COVID, we're having we're having 3 public hearings. It's not that people can come and gather and be a part of it face to face. We're doing it, but education is a big key for us, and alerting the public is, as long as we can get people to understand that this is an important issue, they need to participate. I think we'll do a long way in trying to get through the complications that Gary and Yanis have been talking about, because people don't know. And so we're trying to educate them. I'll stop there because I think it's important that we get a couple of these questions in.
Okay. So, we want to welcome Senator West on the line. Senator West is on the line. Yes. And says he's a member of the redistricting committee and will make available the public hearing schedule by the Senate. Stephanie Swanson wants to know, Chairman Miller, if you will testify for the legislature.
Testify for the legislature?
For redistricting. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Will you? Yeah.
Well, and then I'm gonna get a whole lot of other people that will testify too, because that's important. We've just got to train them and get them involved. Sure.
Yeah. So, okay. So now, good. We're at the close. So does anyone have any final comments, or are there any more questions?
Yeah, I put it in the chat, and because Senator West joined it jogged my memory. I would be wrong if I didn't mention the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. Would also be a great organization for a young lawyer to want to reach out to if they want to help with redistricting. We did work closely with them, but I know they also had for a while their own legal team for a bit, and of course they started a whole new foundation as well. And so either the caucus or the foundation, which you can get the foundation through the caucus, could be a great resource as well. If Gary I'm sure Gary would never have enough legal help for redistricting, but just let's say in the real world or perfect world, he had enough redistricting help and they may want to do something, they could reach out to the Black Caucus as well. And of course, Senator West can help them with that as well, I'm sure. I don't want to volunteer him for anything, but I'm sure he would be able to help them with that to help the caucus out. Because I think the more angles we come from, and I hope we don't get to a lawsuit, but as Gary mentioned, there has not been a time that Texas had to do redistricting when it was covered by the Voting Rights Act that the legislator has passed a redistricting plan that the DOJ approved. Of course, they don't have to do that anymore, but that just tells you the history. And that's been Democratic, Republican, whoever's been in charge of the Texas legislature. So we will probably be to a court case at some point. And I think the more groups we have expressing interest for our community, the better it can be. It wouldn't have to be such a heavy lift or burden on Gary or the association, because it is a lot of work. It's not, I don't want to say it's not easy, but it's not easy.
It's not easy.
I was gonna say, it doesn't sound easy.
It's not easy.
And you look, we're looking at, if I'm trying to bring it back to 76104. I mean, we have, that community is a food desert, a health desert, business desert. I mean, we don't have any of the resources. And so redistricting is going to be an important step for the revitalization of that neighborhood. And my God, if we can't apply what you and Gary have already prescribed here for as a redistricting, we're in a world of trouble. That's why we're frantically trying to get the word out to people and trying to encourage the city to help us get the word out. Redistricting is coming. We're doing a Redistricting 101 seminar January 4. It's virtual. And then we're going to start with a series of hearings. One's going to be in total Spanish because that area in Fort Worth is becoming basically Hispanic, pretty much. And so we want to preserve the gains we already have with the two council people of African-American descent that we have there. But we've got to make sure that we have communities of interest so that the housing patterns have changed in Fort Worth and people are spread out. So it's no longer just African Americans living in Stop 6 on the South Side and the North Side as we did 30 years ago. They live all over. And so there are communities of interest here that we need to lift up so that we can get the kind of council folks that reflect the issues of these neighborhoods.
Well,
And
thank you. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and Carol Robertson as well, who's on the call, the Texas Black Democrats, will be another organization that young lawyers could reach out to. I don't want to shortchange. And Michael Adams, who y'all having tomorrow with TSU. I know they have been working on doing some redistricting and trying to help out some local areas where the state NAACP was focused on, let's call it the sexier stuff with Congress. And I see Eddie Bernice Johnson is on here as well. So, and she's, instrumental to a lot of what we did. So how you doing, Congresswoman Johnson? But TSU with Dr. Adams and Carroll as well, I know they were working to help some of the smaller ones, your counties, your cities, your state boards, yada, 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 with some of the redistricting maps in the past. And they may be doing that again when it comes and having some of the students help draw districts. And so I would probably say ask Dr. Adams about that tomorrow, or even Carroll, and see if that's still going to be happening. And so that will be very important as well.
Okay. And then one last question. When was the last time a lawsuit was filed against the state of Texas due to redistricting? And if so, where can we find the information?
2010 to 2018.
We had 4 trials.
We had about 4. Was the last time this past decade.
Yeah.
I think it's all public record. Gary would know better where it is than I would, though.
Well, the Brennan Center has the whole thing on record, and so that's the easiest place to go and find it. Where the Michael Lee, I guess, with the Brennan Center was there.
Mhm.
And they
Do you
took all the
anticipate any more
data
lawsuits?
and my website. I don't say what.
Do you anticipate any more lawsuits?
But let me
If
say
the sun
this.
rises.
I'm working with Carole and Jesse and Senator West and Congresswoman Johnson to try to put together some things to train young lawyers, and Senator Miles as well. So I met with the caucus last week, and I think everybody knows we don't have a Section 5, so we need to get more young lawyers trained up. But I know Senator West always speaks up on that issue, and so we actually are putting together a plan, and have had emails going this week trying to put it together, because what I'd like to do is to do like kind of a certification training, make sure it's only lawyers that are going to be on our side, so to speak. And then I want to bring in folks who are with many of the other national groups so that they can sometimes serve as co-counsel in cases, or there's somebody that you can look to if you need to know what you need to know. Plus, I've been consulting with one of the legal research entities, one of the big two, about putting together a package that will be user friendly for a young lawyer trying to do, or a new lawyer who hadn't done redistricting before, to try to do the cases. So we're going to be, so keep posted. And I know Carole is committed, Jesse's committed, and the senator and I have talked about it many times, and Congresswoman Johnson is totally committed. So we're going to have something coming out really soon. So tell all the young lawyers to be looking out for it, because we are going to put together that training session.
Well, thank you. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Gary, how are we going to educate? I'm really concerned about our educating everyday, the rank and file citizenry, because this has become such an important issue. I appreciate the lawyers, because without the lawyers, we don't have the lawsuits that bring, that force a lot of this to this work to go forward. But I do believe wholeheartedly that we've got to do a lot of work with just everyday citizens. So not that they're going to be lawyers in this, but at least understand the importance of what redistricting can play into their everyday living. A lot of folks, if it doesn't come to their doorstep, then they're not so concerned about it. But this can affect the doorstep. You don't even have to come inside. This can really affect how you live and the quality of the life that you have. So what do we do about affecting the everyday, getting them up to speed to know what redistricting how it can help them?
Well, I think what we need to do is come together with all the African-American organizations and maybe other aligned organizations, whether it's League of Women Voters, et cetera, and put together a package and a plan where we go to people, whether it's through the radio stations, whether it's doing guest viewpoints for the African-American media, whether it's trying to reach out to the African-American churches and have them to have this as a subject matter, so we can start reaching the people, because it's really real. And the tactic that I would think that we would want to use, and I tell people this, they're usually shocked, but if we all recall when David Duke was running against Edwin Edwards for governor in Louisiana, and Louisiana has never been known for turning out votes better than Texas. But everybody was concerned, and I went down there, a whole lot of folks, we all went down there to volunteer, right? Because that was so important. We didn't want to see Duke get elected. 93% of eligible Black voters turned out. Let me say that again. 93% turned out, but they saw was what David Duke was, what he represented to their lives. If we fast forward this time and we look at the great turnout of African-American voters in this country, even more turned out this time for Biden than did for Obama. And I think it's because people could see with President Trump the real fear of what's actually intended. And what we need to understand is what Dr. Murray says, that if you take the most bigoted part of our population, the bigoted 10%, they turn out now at a 90% clip every election. They've done that because of two reasons. They were shocked at the election of Barack Obama in 2008, and then their perceptions about immigration and Latinos. And so they think that we've got it, that their life depends on it, right? We've tried to tell people, your life depends on this. They believe their life depends on it. So they're skewing the election. So Senator West will tell you that all those moderate Republicans that we did a lot of great legislative reforms with, they're gone. They're getting rid of those guys, right? And so the kind of things that we should expect from the legislature are going to be really problematic. And so things that we think that we automatically might have, whether we might have some state entity that has an office in our district or what have you, that's going to change.
Yeah.
You see what DPS is doing in terms of even driver's licenses and things like that. There's been so much rollback and scale back because Trump has told people you don't really have to do that anymore. You don't have to be politically correct anymore. So the level of things they're going to take away from us. But we need to, and I'm not trying to frighten people, but it's real. But I think that's what we have to do to get to people.
One
Let
more
me just
before.
take a second. Oh, I'm sorry,
Oh.
Giannis. Giannis, after your comment, we're going to pull in Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson. She had some comments to make.
Because I just wanted Gary to highlight. I kind of answered it, but I don't know if I went deep enough. I know Carol, she asked Gary, what kind of financial resources will we need? She was asking that of you. I told her it's not a cheap adventure, let's call it, to do a redistricting trial. It could be hundreds of thousands of dollars when it comes down to having to pay for the various experts, whether it's, as you mentioned, Dr. Murray, who is a political science professor down at the University of Houston, I believe, as well as other map drawers and other experts that you may have to fly in from outside of the state because there's not a lot in Texas. It can get costly very quick, but I think you can probably highlight on that more than I can.
Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson has joined us.
Well, good evening. I don't have too much to offer other than to say that this is critically important. I'm so pleased to see that there are Fort Worth citizens really involved because as the persons that the two that I have very high regard for know that the last time around, we were kind of tricked in the way that that map was drawn and that district was drawn. I got out there and made sure that it was not the person who had to draw it won it. So it was won by the person that went into the runoff from Fort Worth, and that was Vesey. I don't really know how that district is drawn in Fort Worth, but I do know this. Fort Worth deserves a seat. And I don't know where
76104.
76104
Yeah.
is. But I can tell you that I have tried to respond to some of the requests as related to transportation in Fort Worth. There's nothing like having your representative that can be accountable for areas of which you speak. So we're in this battle together. And I called the chair of the Democratic Party early this year to make sure that she would stay involved in this process coming up. So I'm hoping that all of you are together and working together because we all going to need to stick together. I'm just delighted to see that this is all being planned.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes. Well, okay. I think those are our closing words. Can we close with the Congresswoman? Does anybody else have any more comments?
She's
to
a
say?
great closer.
Yes?
She's a great closer. So I think that's great.
Yes. Well, again, thank you so very much, everyone, for joining us. I really appreciate the dialogue, the honesty. Again, the Black Women's PAC is asking for your support on a continuous basis. Of course, this could not have been done again without the NAACP, the Texas Coalition of Black Democrats, the City of Fort Worth Redistricting Task Force Committee Chair. Yeah, all the words.
Thank you, Tracy.
Yes. And all our friends and contributors across the state. So thank you very much,
Stephanie,
everybody.
Good to see you.
Tracy, thank you for what you're
Lorraine
doing. I
busy.
appreciate
Keep
everything you're doing.
Lorraine busy. She's got plenty of talent that she's just resting with.
Ah,
Who? She's
she said, Lorraine Bivens, I think.
Keep
Yeah.
Gina
Lorraine
Bivens.
busy.
Oh, keep Lorraine.
her
Oh,
involved.
yes.
Busy. Oh, Miss Johnson, I'm too busy.
I'm on it.
retired.
No, she's not. No, she's not. No.
I think she's ready to run you for something. Yeah.
Right.
No.
Uh-oh.
Not running for dog catcher.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
But you know
Sounded
what?
like to me, I'll tell you.
Yeah, 76104 is going to preserve. It's going to be all right.
Yes.
And we're going to do a good redistricting job. Gary,
And I do want to thank Stephanie Swanson too. I did not say that earlier with the League of Women Voters. Thank you so much, Steph. She has been
thank you,
continuously
Steph.
keeping this conversation going. So thanks.
They're great partners and allies. I love working with them.
Yeah.
Yes. All right, everybody. Have a good evening. Thank
Love,
you.
peace, and soul, and natural childbirth.
There you go. Watch out. Take care.
Happy holidays.
Happy
Bye.
holidays. Cut everybody.